Okay, our next speaker we have is Corlena Patterson. She's with Scrapie Canada, so we'll turn it over to her now.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for the invite to speak here today, although I am a little concerned about calling it taking the stand. And I've been trying to gauge over the last 2 days how to walk or run to the airport, so time will tell.
Corlena, can you move the mic closer?
My name is Corlena Patterson. I work for the Canadian Sheep Federation, and so there's a sheep on the slide, which made me realize after the fact that maybe I should adapt these to the situation, so my apologies if the sheep offends. But part of why I'm here is because we have assumed the administration of the Chronic Wasting Disease Voluntary Herd Certification Program for producers here in Saskatchewan just recently, and perhaps you are wondering, by virtue of that and the sheep, why us? We've delivered the CWD program in Ontario now for at least the last 9 years that I'm aware of. And we did that because at that time the government of Ontario didn't want to deliver the program, I suppose. It wasn't there exactly, so this is a bit of a third-hand account. But the industry needed somebody to be able to provide it. CWD VHCP is fashioned very much so, and even more with this latest iteration of the national standards, a lot like the voluntary Scrapie flock certification program, which is our Scrapie control program, very similar. So it does our prion disease in the sheep and goat industry. We've been doing that nationally since 2005. So the programs are fashioned together, they're delivered very much the same, and so it was a bit of a natural fit in Ontario. And a number of years ago, getting old, and I can't remember how many years ago that may have been, 2 or 3, we were asked if we would please do the same and start delivering the program for producers in Manitoba because there wasn't somebody to do it. And we said, yeah, no problem, we can do that. And then likewise, we've had a request to help and deliver the program here in Saskatchewan and more recently in Quebec as well. So we kind of now do that block of provinces. My disclaimer, I don't work for the government. No offense to my government colleagues. I'm not the CFIA. That's going to help with how you receive the presentation today and how quickly you're going to be out of the building at the end of the day. But I don't. I work for the sheep industry. We are a farm group, just like you guys are farm groups, and our job here is to help support you beyond the program, to help folks through the process of applying, enrolling, staying on the program, and advancing, and help mitigating the risk of the disease. So that's all my disclaimers for getting started. So just a very quick overview, and many of you are familiar with this. I was told it's clear. Every time. Okay, my presentation doesn't want to move.
Well, I was looking for somebody, because I'm not.
Okay, let me do this because I find frequently they don't work for me, so hopefully forgive the view. I don't know why. I printed out a copy and brought it with me because every time I stand and do the presentation, they never work. So notable dates in terms of the program. As many of you may be well aware, the national standards for the CWD Voluntary Herd Certification Program have just recently gone through quite a significant overhaul. It was done through a consultation process by the CFIA in 2016 and 2017. Why this is relevant and why this program is similar to the VSFCP is the program rules are maintained by the CFIA, and the program in turn is endorsed by the CFIA. So they make up the program rules, they do it in consultation with industry. I know there's a couple of you in the room that have been part of that process of the overhaul through 16 and 17, as were we. I tried to make it clear through that process that our job there was simply to inform the discussion from an administrative standpoint. How realistic is it to validate all of these rules that you're putting in place? How are they ever going to be, that information going to be managed? That was our perspective. But they had the significant overhaul of the rules, and they were published in the spring of last year, April 2017. So they've been around and out and available for a while. The original implementation deadline, by implementation deadline I mean for those of us who are administrators. So for those of us who recognize this CFIA as being a delivery agent for the program, making the program available to you, we were supposed to put these national standards in play by December 31st, 2017, and that was the same for every jurisdiction. There were some real challenges with that because there was such a significant overhaul to the program. We had to rewrite our SOP. The more I talk like this, the more I feel like government folk. Anyway, we have to develop a standard operating procedures. It explains to you how, it makes it transparent, how we're going to process files, what we're going to look at, and how we're going to validate your status on the program based on what we're seeing in those files. So if these things happen, you stay on the program, you don't stay on the program, you go ahead, you go back a level. So we had to write that to correspond to all the national standards changes, and that was a real challenge to make happen. And it wasn't entirely because we're not familiar with how to write SOPs, we certainly are. But the CFIA themselves were a little bit challenged over what elements of these were going to be, of the program were going to be measured and how. So for my Saskatchewan folks who worked very closely with the ministry on what it's going to look like, what statuses are going to look like. Do you get advanced? Do you not get advanced? Do you lose status? What a nightmare. So the CFIA really pushed their deadline back to March 31st of 2018. So we, early in this year, very early over the Christmas holidays, early in the year, we ratified that, how we deliver the program documents. And February 1, we've started delivering the program against the new standards in the province of Saskatchewan. And I wanted to make that distinction a little bit because there's also the deadline that everybody else is familiar with, and sometimes it's being confused, which is the deadline to be on the program in order to be eligible for compensation in these disease control actions. So Betty spoke very clearly about what all that means. But in order to be on the program, be included in those actions and eligible for compensation, you have to be on the program by the end of March. So April 1, you have to be enrolled. Otherwise, you can get on afterwards. But if you get on the program after April 1st and not currently enrolled, my understanding is, and I think this is still the case, perhaps Betty, you can help me with this, you then have to be on the program for a year before that eligibility kicks in. And so I wanted just to separate those deadlines a little bit, because then we have people saying, no, the deadline is April 1st. And that's for the disease control action, but actually delivering of the program since February 1st in Saskatchewan has been against this new package of program rules. So the national standards, the program rules, are built on 4 basic pillars, and they've been built out quite significantly in this last version of the program. They're built on inventory control, so that's maintenance of accurate and complete inventory records, in which all services are accounted for and their movement is accounted for. So it's on your enrollment year, when you get on the program, it's us understanding what currently you have on farm, and then in subsequent years, understanding how we reconcile those movements. Where do the animals come from if they're new? Where do they go to if they're not on the inventory? And how do we validate, in fact, where they went to afterwards? Surveillance, so the ongoing test of deaths and slaughter cervids, and we're going to talk a little bit more about each of these pillars in a few minutes, and again, what information we're looking for and what the implications of it are. Limiting the acquisitions to enrolled cervids of equivalent or higher program status, that's generally the rule. It doesn't mean that you can't acquire cervids from a non-enrolled premises or a lower status premises. You can, it just has an impact on where you are then in the program, and if you're, whether or not you become certified and how long that might take. And then this new piece, I've been asked to speak a bit more specifically about it, which we will do in the presentation, is the biosecurity measures that have been built into this program. And those are perhaps one of the most significant changes because they didn't exist in the previous iteration. So those are the 4 pillars of what we look for in the program and what it's built on. So for annual inventories, program participation requires that you do an inventory report. For the province of Saskatchewan, that's perhaps not as big a deal or a change because you do provincial inventory, you do inventories annually for provincial regulation purposes. This is different in some of the jurisdictions where they don't necessarily have to. So you have to conduct an inventory report. All cervids on the premises are included in that enrollment and the inventory, regardless of the ownership. So you may have 10 head and have another 5 that belong to somebody else on your farm. If they're on your farm, they have to be included in that annual inventory. They're considered part of your herd. Doesn't matter who owns them, just matters if they're there. Before 12 months of age, they have to be identified in a way that allows for inventory tracking. That's generally one management tag of your choice. And they only need to be, they can be identified on an inventory if they're less than 12 months of age, as simply this number of animals under 12 months of age. You can report them however you would like. Animals that are 12 months of age or older need 2 unique IDs. One must be a provincial mandated ID. in the province of Saskatchewan, which is the only reason I asked the question about ID, not to start a whole traceability discussion necessarily, but to understand the implications here. So the program requirement for anybody, regardless of where you are, is 2 unique identifiers, and in this province, of course, is the fact that one of those is a provincial requirement. The information relevant to the inventory itself, we need to know about all of the cervids, the species, individual ID, the sex of the animal, date of birth, or the date that it entered the herd, if it's something that's been acquired over the course of the program year, and their source. Again, it's kind of the same thing, saying it twice, whether they're homegrown, purchased, or a loaned animal or something in for breeding purposes. So they'd have to be included in the report and or in your reconciliation, whether you keep in or out. Sounds like a lot of information. For those of you on the program, we have asked for an enrollment package. We've tried to make it easy to figure out where and how to put this information to get it available to us. And I know a lot of people complain about the vast number of forms that we have included in the program, but they do make it easy. So there's an inventory form that gets sent to you that has the fields, just simply asks you to fill in the spaces and make this information available. If the forms are complete, we have the info that we need. Physical inventories are required. Physical inventory means that each individual animal's ID needs to be checked and validated. They're required in your enrollment year and your first advancement year. They have to be conducted by an accredited veterinarian, an official vet, or in Saskatchewan, a game farm investigator. So if you're doing inventories as part of a provincial requirement anyway, that's considered a legitimate inventory report, and we'll leave a copy of that. Cervids 12 months and older, individually inspected and IDs verified, and the 12 months counted and recorded. So again, it could be simply 150 of these under 12 months of age, perfect. And then at least every 2 years, there needs to be a physical inventory. In between that, an annual inventory report, it can be a report that you generate by simply citing the animals. Yes, they're there, got this many, these are supposed to be their ID numbers. Although in a year when you generate that inventory report that a vet didn't do, you need to have your accredited veterinarian just reconcile, validate the information. Again, another handy-dandy form that says, yes, I am a fit vet, yes, they did this inventory, yeah, I looked through it, it was good. Easy enough to validate it and make sure that we have the information. And then in your subsequent years that you're on the program, we will record, and you need to submit information relevant to any of those changes in the inventory. So if they were born on the farm, you simply tell us that this is a natural increase on the farm, perfect, no problem. If it isn't, then where did it come from? And a proof of herd status may be required, especially if they're coming from another province whose program we're not managing within our field data fields. So data, that's the date that it left the herd, so if it's been sold, and the reason it left, so died on farm, in which case we need to have a test result that goes with it, if it's sold or if it's escaped. And then the reconciling documents that just kind of validate that information. So those could be a bill of sale, movement permits. Historically, we haven't required bills of sale in the cervid industry because everything has a movement permit. So a movement permit for anything from the farm is perfectly adequate in terms of reconciling it. If it died on farm, then the test results. There are as a list of exemptions. We're going to talk about them. I think it's on the next slide. A couple slides down. Some exemptions. So if there's destruction by a predator and the sample couldn't be collected and wasn't noticed in time for it to be a viable sample, that's an exemption. If there's a barn fire, we had that in the goat sector one day, one time everybody lost it, which is horrible. Nonetheless, the animals that are deceased in that, it was simply a report from the fire department that there was a fire on the farm. So there's a whole list of animals that can, these things with animals might disappear from inventory, that as long as it can be validated by the appropriate authorities, considered a reconciling document. And then if they got out, we have these escape reports that we provide a copy of, simply fill them in and say it escaped, this is what I did with it once it escaped, and that reconciles it. So surveillance, and then this isn't new either, this has always been a program element, is that 100% of all cervids 12 months of age or older that die or humanely euthanized or hunted on farm have to be tested. That's been part of the program since its inception, to the best of my understanding. What is new, though, in these national standards is the slaughter surveillance requirements. So starting in this calendar year, half of all slaughters, 50% on farm or at an abattoir, have to be tested, and those test samples remitted as part of your reconciling inventory. January 1, starting January 1, so in the 2019 calendar year, that's 75% of your slaughters, and January 1, 2020, that's 100% of your slaughters. And those have to include, and we've had this discussion about how we validate that. We're going to try and help folks through the process, including animals slaughtered in the US. So if they're shipped live to the US and slaughtered, there has to be a test result. A test result doesn't have to be by a Canadian lab. In fact, I don't think it can be. I might be mistaken. You know, in Scrapie anyway, you can't send a hen back and forth across the border for testing. People get really, really fussy about that. And so any USDA-approved lab that can do the testing there is considered a legitimate test result. And yeah.
Would you consider a question?
Oh, sure.
Okay, fine. Slaughtered on the farm or on an abattoir in the U.S.
Mhm.
Or if they're sold.
If they're sold live, it's sold live.
Good.
Problem solved. I'm giving you the authorized version of this, the presentation. If there's gray areas that we want to discuss, it's not our place to
That's
help
not
point
gray.
out gray areas. But we can help because there are, so if you've sold it and somebody else exported it and tested it and they're not on the program, when you're on the program, you do not have to sell to a farm or premises on the program. You have to purchase from one without impacting your status. Where they're sold is not captured in the program. So if there is a bill of sale and we would permit change of ownership relevant to that animal before it's exported and slaughtered, as far as I'm concerned, that's a sold product. I'm gonna, now this is where I avoid, this is where I really hope the heck there's not a CFIA person in there, but I'm gonna duck my head and make sure that he's not looking at me. Stare him down. Again, our role here is to help you in the program. We're not, and it is a challenging thing that we do, right, for managing this program, because we're trying to help people beyond a program that hasn't necessarily got the easiest set of standards to adhere to. I get it, the Scrapie program is exactly the same. I hear all those complaints. And I can't bend those rules, because what you see on your side is me or us enforcing the program requirements. What you're missing on the other end of that is the annual audit where the CFIA comes in our office, pulls all of our files and goes through them and makes sure that we have delivered the program exactly and precisely against those national standards. And if they find that there's an instance where that hasn't been done, they're just going to overrule me or us. And so there's absolutely no use for two reasons. There's absolutely no use in us bending any kind of the program requirement to get you out of it, because the CFI is just going to overturn that and they're going to kick you off or suspend you or do whatever should have technically been done in the first place. Secondly, in many aspects, this is a market access program. And I don't mean strictly from an export perspective. It's a market access program for your domestic market as well, which is what I try to tell sheep and goat producers. It's a program designed not just for you to access markets, but to mitigate the risk of the disease, right? And if you're on the program, and you've taken the time to be on the program, and you're advertised as being on the program, whether you use it as a tool to advertise or not in the sheep and goat industry, some folks do, or simply by virtue of you being on the program, you're listed on a website as having a certain status on that program. It serves as a bit of a guarantee to your trading partner, this country or some other, that you've taken the right steps to mitigate the risk. We would be doing a disservice to you as an industry to say that you're certified or you're low risk for the disease, but we skip some steps and you're not in fact. Right? And so your hand got up immediately. So nor do we want to be in that position.
I got to back up a little bit.
Sure.
I need complete clarity on this. If I'm going to ship animals to a slaughter facility in the U.S.
Can't hear you.
If I'm going to ship slaughtered animals to a facility in the U.S. and the CFIA transport permit is from my farm to the slaughter facility, will I have to test the heads?
Yeah, unless you have a bill of sale that demonstrates that they were sold prior to or sold, and that movement permit is issued in a name that's not relevant to yours. Because
okay, but that permit would have to come from another game farm, would it not?
Yeah, I would think.
Okay.
Yeah, I would think. I can use a bill of sale because they're a legitimate reconciliation document in lieu. That doesn't happen frequently in the cervid industry. I don't think I've seen one. So far, a movement permit has been any reconciling document that attests to the animal's change in premises location. So I would strongly urge that that's the concern about testing, and that it has been sold prior to being shipped, then a bill of sale would constitute, but...
Where's CFIA on this? Do we know? We have 4-year-old declaration from them saying that pretty much the same thing. But are they changing their mind, Betty?
I think Corlena has it right. If it's sold live, still within the country, you've sold it live. If you're selling it directly to the plant, they are clearly slaughtered and you would need the results. So we will look at making arrangements with those states where those U.S. slaughter plants are. If we know the slaughter plant, we can work with the state vet, we'll see what we can do to help out with the testing down there and make sure that the testing can happen.
I already have that all in place. All I need is somebody to say that they will accept the chain of custody back to PDS that I've established.
You can get them back across the board.
Maybe.
I suggest her idea about a USDA approved law might be a better option, and then we would need to have a contract
Okay.
with them for us to pay for it.
Great. My problem is, will you pay for it then?
Didn't I just say that the reason would be so that we could have a contract in place so we could pay for it?
Right, but also time is the problem. The U.S. labs are worse than Alberta for returning results. Our slaughter plants don't have the cooler space. Therefore, it's a redundant system.
Yeah, with the exception of the test results are not something that we have to have within a certain time frame of the actual slaughter event. So to reconcile this on an annual basis is all I needed, if that's your approaching time.
No, and for you, that is the actual function of making it work in the real world is my problem.
Yep.
We have been in contact with Wisconsin and their state vet there, and they're more than willing to help us get the samples and get them to one of their labs. And in fact, it's actually a requirement that if it is regulated that you need to test at slaughter, their inspectors have to take those samples. It's just a matter of the logistics, turnaround time, I don't know. But it really sounded like they would work with us.
Oh yeah, we have no problem in the slaughter plant. We have no problem, as far as I'm aware, as you're saying, with the officials. The problem we have in PDS and with pressure from PDS on Alberta escalating their return time is my real world problem. Because if the plant can't move those carcasses until the test results are back, and that's going to take a week, the plant won't kill my animals. Pretty simple.
I think it's very clear that if you are retaining ownership and shipping to a plant in the U.S. for custom slaughter, then you are obliged, in order to continue your certification and continue your status on the program, to have tests done. If you are selling those animals and you are shipping them to the U.S. border, the CFIA may or may not specify the establishment which those animals are going to. It may simply say CFIA Customs Office, Emerson, Portal, whatever you're using, Detroit, Windsor. That may be the end of the movement permit, because of course it has no validity once it crosses the U.S. border. And then, if you are actually selling those animals to a buyer in the U.S. who is paying you on the basis of hot carcass weight, then you would need to craft a bill of sale, as Corlena says that they are purchasing these animals. These animals are sold to XYZ Corporation, and the price is based on $3.90 US per pound hot carcass weight to be paid within 24 hours after HCW is obtained. That's a clear sale. The other one is a clear chain of ownership straight through to the killing in the US. And so I think that's what you clarified, is that if the owner has that bill of sale and they can be provided a copy of the bill of sale, the border and customs and border paperwork, and the movement permit going at least to the border, then that's the end of the responsibility of the herd here.
And we've used movement permits as a reconciling document for the movement off farm, but I intentionally added a bill of sale because if there's a change of ownership with that movement on farm, that is sufficient to. So if you're concerned about whether or not the CFIA will recognize the movement permit or the bill of sale is legitimate, it would be the bill of sale moving it off. Who it moves to or from doesn't matter, provided the ownership of the animal changes. And that's, so that, and we have used that in the sheep sector, in the voluntary scraping program. We've used bill of sale. We don't have movement permits or a requirement for a movement permit. So if somebody has a bill of sale that I sold it to somebody, that is sufficient to say that that animal is sold. And it doesn't matter where it goes to once that sale is complete.
Right, and I agree, and I'm not trying to create something here that we don't need. But I do not want 2 years from now getting caught in a situation where CFIA says, oh, hold it. That animal went from your farm direct to slaughter. You didn't test the heads, you're done.
Yeah, and I'm again not CFIA, but bill of sale has been a reconciling document that the animal departed under a different ownership from the farm, and you're entitled to sell that animal to whoever you want to the farm. You can sell it to a non-enrolled farm, and they can turn around and they can kill it, and there's no implications that animal ever having to be tested after a chain left the ownership of your farm, right? So
no question about that. I totally understand that. I just don't want it. The integrity of the VHCP is what we're after here.
yeah.
And I do not want to be mousetrapped 2 years down the road.
No, what we would, as an administrator, we would defend that as an appropriate document in reconciliation of the movement of the animal off that farm. And I made it clear, though, to begin with, that the CFIA can come in and overturn the decisions, but that's how the VHCP is written, and that's the understanding and the conversation that we've had with respect to it. What they choose to do in 5 years is a little bit beyond my control, not working for them, but I would stand behind the delivery of the delivery of that based on that bill of sale.
I want some clarity from somebody in government.
Pardon me?
I need some clarity from somebody in government.
Somebody in the
Government.
okay, I can work on it for you and get some clarity on that. And so to make it clear, though, with the national, what we set out in the SOP is a document not just that we use internally for managing how we deliver it. It's a document that had to be approved by the CFIA as an acceptable means by which the program is delivered. And so that implementation of a bill of sale reconciling the movement of an animal off the farm has been considered a legitimate reconciliation of change of ownership of the farm. So I can absolutely ask that question, absolutely validate it with them. Again, I'm quite certain that's the conversation we had this first place, but I'm happy to do that and pass it along to you. So, but to be clear, that SOP that we work from, the one that if you're on the program, you'll have received a copy. If you want to get on the program, you'll receive a copy. It's not just our interpretation of how we feel it should be done. It's a validation of, in fact, following these guidelines will ensure that a decision made with respect to status based on that SOP is upheld by the CFIA. Okay, so moving right along. What's that? So surveillance. So we talked a lot about the slaughter surveillance. There is, of course, the on-farm surveillance is a requirement for COPD. If you can chill or freeze a head within 36 hours of that animal dying, the sample within the brain will remain testable. It could be sent in heads with all ID in situ. So that's a requirement that the ID goes with the animal for testing so they can validate, in fact, that's the ID number relevant to that. I don't know if that happens all the time. Defer to my lab people if they always get the ID or not. That's supposed to be the requirement within the program. That's something that we've also changed in the VSFCP. We used to have we used to allow producers to collect their own samples, remit the sample without the head and the tags in situ. There was some concern from trading partners of the chain of command and ownership of that animal. Like if you removed the obex and there was no ID tag, could it be from any animal? Could it be from something that was 3 months old and clearly never demonstrated sign of scraping? So having those tags in situ is really what they would be looking for to ensure that it is in fact relevant to that ID number. We are required to ask that you tell us about your on-farm deaths on a quarterly basis. So our program runs on a program year. When you sign up, you're given an anniversary date. Once a year on that anniversary date, you need a report. However, we are asked to collect information of on-farm deaths on a quarterly basis. So we have a form you can simply fill out. It has a date on the top of it that says what day you have to send it in or what quarter date you have to send it in on. And it's really just a statement of what animal died. It doesn't have to be supported when it's sent to us with the actual test results. Those are only required at the end of the year. But on a quarterly basis, you do have to tell us these ID numbers died or were slaughtered or hunted on farm, on my enrolled farm in this quarter, and send it in to us.
So if there's 0 deaths, we do not need to submit
That's correct.
a quarterly.
No, that's correct. If there's nothing to report, there's nothing to report. So as required on that quarterly basis, you would send it to us. And there is a requirement within the program to submit samples in a timely manner for testing. It's not defined exactly how many days on that, and so I'm not required to enforce that either. So don't ask me why I have to have it report quarterly. It says it in the standards, you got a form, so I have to know. I don't do much with that form after I get it necessarily, but that's a whole different story. Unsuitable samples could lead to suspension assessed by the status assessor. Okay? So there are samples that will arrive at the lab that they cannot be tested. I'm looking at my PDS person to validate that they didn't get frozen or chilled within 36 hours, they rotted away, something happened to the head, and they were simply not testable. And although there are a list of exemptions by which we can let those things slide if they're simply untestable because they weren't adequately caught, I had somebody call and say I had a staff member who didn't collect these 9 samples and so they couldn't be submitted, and however many it was, then that's not considered a legitimate exemption. That's samples weren't collected and they weren't remitted, and uncollected and unremitted samples are a problem, and they are subject to a suspension over time. So it's not a way of getting past the testing requirements. Sacrifices cannot be used to overcome repeated submission of poor quality samples. There are instances where there's missed samples where you can compensate for. We're going to talk about that in a second. But just because the sample was rotten, couldn't be tested, we can't let those be overcome. So exemptions, we talked about these: destruction by fire, carried away by a predator, and we had this in sheep and goats. Just give me 1 second, I'm just going to go through the slide and we'll come back to the question. So we've had this in sheep and goats where there'd be a predator kill, and if they're out on the range and it's not something you see within enough time to collect that sample and remit it, I've said to people, well, they don't eat the ear tags quite frequently. Yes, at least do they? Maybe some predators eat the ear tags. But we've had instances where in order to fulfill a carried away by a predator exemption, I've asked folks to just take a picture. Take a picture of the carcass and the state in which it's in. Ideally, if the tags or the head is still there, and even just a predator kill site with a lot of blood and some fur or wool, in the case of the ones that we've done before, and we can work with situations like that. We don't know that necessarily happens quite as frequently in game, but I know in sheep and goats, it's not all uncommon to have a bear come in and kill off a number of ewes. So. Then, as long as we can validate it in some way, we'll help work with you to make sure that there's an exemption made in those instances that can in fact be a demonstrated exemption. Theft, I don't know if you guys, sheep and goats are easier to thieve, I suppose. Loss or destruction of the sample no longer in control of farm owner or operator. So we've had instances where people have frozen the heads that would have been a viable sample. They went to ship it to the lab. It was stuck in a UPS carrier over a hot weekend, and by the time the lab got it, that thing was not testable. So if we get the lab saying that something along those lines happened, then that's considered an exemption. And any other reason over which an owner or operator has no control and can be validated by a third party. And I'll always get questions about the example. I don't know. We can burn, that's my favorite expression, we can burn that bridge when we get to it. And figure out if you have a lost sample which you couldn't control, then we'll try to manage whether or not that fits under exemption. You had a question?
Yeah, so if I submit just the OBEX with the tags in a bag, is that recognized?
No, they have to be in situ and ideally in the head, or if your veterinarian wants to collect the OBEX to cut down on the shipping rate and send it with it, because they're accredited third party their accreditation is in fact a validation that they're legitimately a delivery person for the program.
So basically all hunt ranches are exempt from the program then, because, you know, how do we, we're cutting skull plates and taking tags out for the key, I mean.
But no, if you have an accredited veterinarian collect your sample, or cultivate the sample for you and validate the ID number relevant to the animal.
That, you know what it's going to cost if vet come out and take 50 or 100 samples?
So I try to preface this with the fact that I don't necessarily set the rules to the program, I can only validate them. And I get, again, that they're not always the easiest to follow. But the truth of the matter is, if you can't validate a level of risk by doing the testing on the animals that are died or killed on the farm, then we can't adequately assess the level of risk in the animals. So if you have a hunt farm that's on the program and they're all hunted and none of those samples can be submitted and we can't validate a level of CWD because there's no samples relevant to the farm, then it's irrelevant anyway. Because
You can validate if there was CWD. I mean, all the heads are tested, right? So what's, so, you know, I don't.
It's just a
You
removal.
submit your tags and a piece of brain on.
But who's collecting a piece of fruit?
I am.
And has that been permitted under?
It's
Provincial
for surveillance, for mandatory surveillance, it could be permitted, but for the VHCP, where you need like a third-party validation, then you're, you know, there, I guess the concerns would be, I know you're honest mentally, but the concerns would be that you could, you know, like you were saying, that's why you quit doing it under the Scrapie program, as they could be substituted. Now, you could, you know, if a hunt farm really wanted to be on this program, it doesn't have to be the accredited vet. It could be a valid, you know, is that correct?
Well, an approved third party.
An approved third party.
Which could be a vet technician under the supervision of an accredited veterinarian would be an example of that. I'm not sure if you're comfortable with a game farm investigator being somebody who validates that sort of information,
Well,
but they're considered an approved third party within the program
right,
as well.
and you know, we have talked about that, because I know, Renee, that you would,
But it sounds like I would need samples under the VHCP.
Well, an approved third party,
we would have to get them to approve, but that's a whole nother discussion. And I don't know.
Yeah, if there's a need for a third-party accreditation system, it's something we can look at.
Well, is the problem, what's the problem? Because the tags, are you suspicious?
They have to be able to confirm the ID, so that's why the head in situ with the tags or an approved third party to collect the samples is under this program, because there's really, they don't want, there's no room for doubt, right? We have to know it's that animal and the identity is approved.
So that brain does belong to those, or the
animal with that ID tag.
retrotherapy.
Yeah. Where the actual OBEX sample can be reconciled against the animal's identification by a third party, be that the lab collecting the sample or an approved third party, other than yourself collecting the OBEX sample, validating that the sample came from the animal with that ID number present in your inventory.
You could do DNA
Or do you think all you
testing.
need is somebody to verify that you put the right tag in the bag?
Yes.
Yes.
So could it be the hunter?
No,
It has to be approved.
It has to be an approved third party within the program.
Now, if we had really cheap DNA testing, you could take, you know, maybe a bit of what was ever on that ear tag and do it on the brain. And
Well, that's a good point, because the Scrapie program does permit, in those instances, a sample of the ear tag with enough genetic material to be able to cross-reference it to the sample, if that's the case. But that doesn't exist in the VHCP, unfortunately. And again, I didn't write the VHCP in terms of rules. I'll come in 1 second. Didn't write it in terms of rules, but that is certainly something that you can put up for the next iteration of the program, is that provided there's enough of the sample to cross-reference the genetic material with the OBEX and the ear tag. But the way it's written now, it's not currently the case. So I have a couple of questions. I had one down here, and then I'm going to come back over to this one over here.
Just a matter of clarification and question over here from Bentley. Bentley, I assume your hunt ranch is not on VHCP.
I guess not, no.
Okay, so nor is mine. And I get a little confused here. Certainly surveillance level. On my hunt ranch, are you saying if I'm just on surveillance and not VHCP that I need a vet to verify which tag goes with the brain?
No, I'm speaking relative only to the VHCP. I'm not
That's
talking
what I
about-
thought. I'm relaxing now, thank you.
I'm talking about, and that's where I know it quite frequently, we get some confusion over what the mandatory surveillance program is in the province and what the VHCP is in the province.
We're happy just to get
Good. I'm good.
That's not a question.
Yeah, just adding to that is there. We have a little hunt farm. I also and enroll in the program.
Okay.
You're telling me that when we come to this sample, that I have to have the ear tag in before they can take that sample?
Yes, the expectation.
That isn't going to work. Then I'm out of the program because I can't keep that thing on the tape out of this thing and go home today.
So I appreciate your frustration. I really
Well, it's not frustration, it's a fact.
and so,
Cancel me.
pardon me?
Cancel my enrollment because it's no good to me.
Okay, and I apologize if that's the case, aside from the fact that I don't make the program rules, right? And it wouldn't be different right now under the new program rules if I were doing it or if the government of Saskatchewan were doing it. This is not a function of who's delivering the program currently. It's a function of the program revisions that happened by the CFIA through 2016 and 2017. And so I try to make that clear, and I get a number of calls over concerns about program elements, and I make note of all of them because on an annual basis the federal government will change those program requirements. They'll include new elements, take out some old elements that don't work, and we have a process of gathering that information and making it part of the discussion on your behalf in the future. But I didn't make the program rules, so all I can do is validate the information against that, and it would be the same if the province was doing it if somebody else was doing it.
And then just, because I don't know your situation, but it might be that you could get a third-party person to take that sample.
Could we use a notary?
Well, they would have to be trained in the sample collection and
Could you video it?
certification program.
Could you use a notary?
I mean, this is a real problem for him. I can work around it, but there's some people that might not be able to. So could you video it? I mean,
Well,
lots of us have pulled hundreds of stems. I mean,
Taking this, so and I don't know if this helps or doesn't help, but in the voluntary Scrapie program, for years, producers were allowed to take their own OBEC sample, collect their own sample, and just remit the tissue as opposed to remitting the head. It was allowed under the program for the longest of time. And we have videos on how you remove an OBEC sample. That was provided as an opportunity. But the CFIA discontinued that in our program and sort of the VHCP as well 2 years ago. And it was based on input from a number of people that were concerned about the ownership or the legitimate linking of the sample material to the ID of the animal against how that animal lived in your inventory or didn't previously. And so taking the sample is not the problem. Moving the sample is something a producer can do. Videos are available on how it's done, and the tools used to be sold through the veterinary supply stores. And so it was not, but it's something that the CFIA no longer had allowed in that program, nor do they do based on the national standards in this program, over concern that it's a submission of the sample without somebody else saying, yes, that OBEC sample belonged to the animal with that ID number in here. It's not whether or not it can be collected. It's not whether or not you collect the proper material or sample, although it can sometimes be tricky. It's over validating ownership of that sample to that animal. Yeah.
is there some way that we could approach CFIA and see if they would recognize, like in a hunt ground situation?
Yes, and I think that's what Sheila was trying to say, is that third parties can be approved to conduct that service for you, whether that is the inspectors, and that's up to the government of Saskatchewan if they want to approve who can collect it. It can be a vet tech that works for a vet, although in my experience, I don't know that getting a vet tech on your farm is any cheaper than getting a vet on the farm. But yes, there can be an approved third party to collect the samples. Is there currently? No. The only current approved third parties in the program are accredited vets, provincial vets, and game farm investigators.
Yeah, but is there any way that we can talk to CFIA and just have them recognize that if somebody can pull the stem,
yes,
and if it can be tested, why wouldn't that be good enough?
You can,
you realize what's happened here is the guy shoots an animal. They want to take the tags out for pictures and get it dealt with right away. Well, you don't have a vet or somebody standing around all day until this guy finds his animal. Mm-hmm. So I mean, isn't there some way that we could work this out? So
yes, there absolutely is. They have to approve the process by which a third party would be trained to collect the information, but there is in fact a way of making it happen. Does it exist now? It doesn't exist currently. But can it? Yes, it can.
No, I think what you're missing his point here is that some of these places might harvest one animal today, one tomorrow, one the day after, 2 next week. We're not going to call somebody out every time we get a sample taken.
I'm not missing that. I'm not missing that point. And I would also suggest that if you have a hunted animal, right, and you don't want to have somebody collect it out, if you're going to preserve that head or that brain, it can be frozen or chilled for a number of hours and the sample be considered valid for a period of time, so you can accumulate them over a period of time and collect a number in one visit is also an option.
Just keep it in mind, right, that she didn't make these rules, right, and she can't change them standing on that podium. She's a service provider, and CFIA is the one you need to tackle, big time.
So Ian, along that lines about how you change the rules, because I agree, I understand only what you're saying, but so what's the process for changing rules going forward? So this is the first draft, and then if I really hate something and everybody else hates it too, how do you review it and the program so I get compliance?
Mark, we work at the Canadian Cervid Alliance level. We've got a committee in place for the last 8 years working on changing these rules. We had a very amicable reach the point with CFIA until about November last year when CFIA walked in and plumped down a pile of new regulations. He said, this is the way it is. And we said, no, it's no way. We didn't agree to this. You've got at least 30% in here is different from what we have ever seen or agreed to. They said, this is it. So the next thing is we reopen negotiations. We talk to the president's office. We talk to the minister's office, and we start changing so that in a year from now, you might have a difference.
And then, yeah.
Canadian Cervid Alliance is going through this and coming up with the next hit list of issues as it stands now.
That's right.
Yeah, the national standards, the CFIA will put together a group. They have a working group that has industry representatives on it from different provinces, provincial government officials, the CFIA themselves, and producers in different provinces. And they have said, even though this iteration hadn't been updated since, I want to say 2003, so it had been a good 13, 14 years since it had been updated, have made it clear that it's something that they will revisit on an annual basis, and they'll do in consultation with industry. So I know there's a couple of people in this room who sat on the group this last time that it was done, and that's why I said we create a list of challenges that we have with the program in terms of compliance and in terms of administration. So complaints about this just simply won't work for us. They don't fall on deaf ears. Ian's right, I can't change it because I didn't make it. I'm trying to help deliver it, but I have to deliver it against the standard because if I don't, they'll kick you off anyway. I'm not doing you any favors by making you go through the whole process to get on the program, to not be able to stay on it because they overturn something that's an injustice to you, and it's a waste of our resources as well to make it happen. We're trying to help provide that service, but we'll make this list, and I have a list of my own already, that I'll take to the government and say, this is ridiculous, we can't do this, and I'm happy to take your list as well. But more importantly, coming from your industry groups, it's one of the best places that it comes from, that it can come from. You could sit down at that annual consultation process and be part of the discussion on what the next iteration. So this isn't a draft. This is what's in place for the next year. Next year there'll be an update to the program. Everybody comes to the table with what doesn't work and review how you're going to improve it and change it better. So I'm going to roll lighter right along in the rest of this. Change the flyer to something else. Surveillance. So we talked about some missed samples, and there will be occasion when they're missed and there's no exemption for them. We've tried to put in place a policy for not having to remove folks from missed samples because there's a requirement for 100% testing. If you're on the program at levels E through A, and you have a missed sample, you can substitute 2 animals 12 months or older for every missed sample. So if you have a sample that was untestable and it couldn't qualify to be a valid test for that animal, you can use 2 animals to replace that 1 sample. If you're certified, it's 1 for 1. These can be, well, I say this, I will double check in the sheep sector. If you have to do a slaughter, if you have to sacrifice an animal to replace a missed sample, we will use a slaughter sample, so people will keep a wether on farm to test if they have 1 missing in a year and use that as a substitute. They'll take something to slaughter and cultivate that. Now, with the changes in the slaughter surveillance for this program, we'll have to validate if that's something that we can do or if you have to specifically sacrifice for that replacement. but currently as it sits, at least there's an opportunity to compensate for missed samples. But there isn't a failure to compensate for large numbers of missed samples without some impact on the status. So if you've missed a sample, if you choose not to compensate with a sacrifice to make up for that lost sample, it also doesn't mean that you necessarily are suspended from the program, but there will be an impact to your status. So if you have a single sample that you don't want to replace with a sacrifice, you're downgraded to status level. If you have up to 50% of your eligible samples that are missed, and you don't wish to compensate for with sacrificed samples, it's downgraded 2 status levels, and over 50%, it's downgraded 3 status levels. Limited acquisitions, we talked about this before. Introductions only may be from herds of equivalent or higher status in order for you to maintain your status on the program. You can bring in a lower status animal, but then your whole herd falls to whatever status level that animal is that you brought in on farm, because with that introduced animal of unknown risk, so is your farm. We've learned that from the environmental transmission of the disease from one animal to another. So if you're going to bring in something that's going to increase your risk of having it on farm because you don't know its source, then likewise that's going to be the impact on the farm. When you bring them from CWD-free countries, there's no impact on status. Imported from a country with recognized CWD program, but the status and level of that program, that animal on that program in that country has a similar impact on yours. And then semen and embryos can be sourced from non-participating herds, and of course you can't commingle. So you can't take them all to a common place, commingle them, still under your ownership, move them to some location, commingle them with unstatused or lower status animals, and come back and keep your same status. Whatever status they were exposed to, whatever level of risk they were exposed to having been moved or commingled, has now become the status of the animals on your farm. Site plan. So with the enrollment or the first advancement after these, now that these new standards have been implemented, we are requiring a site plan of the farm. So you'll get a piece of paper that says, please draw your site plan. You can do a handy dandy hand drawing of what it looks like. We have folks that have taken Google Earth picture for our young folks that love technology. You can Google Earth it, take a Sharpie, outline where houses, fences are, and the like. Totally suitable, works for me. It has to demonstrate all structures and grazing areas that will house cervids, your feed storage, your water sources, and the locations of fences, and the proximity to other farm cervids. This is a piece that we're about to jump into that was of some contention, and that was about the risk factors and proximity to wild cervids and prevalence of CWD in wild cervids in what area. And we had a lot of difficulty untangling what the implications of that were going to be. So this statement is, we're only looking for fences and proximity to farm cervids, and not proximity to what your wild population might be, how close they ever get to your farm, or what the prevalence is in the area. And there's pros and cons to that. There's some that think that's awesome, and there's some that are going to not think it's awesome, and moving on. So in fencing, sufficient, there is a requirement. We're going to do the biosecurity piece too, and actually that should have been biosecurity. It is supposed to be. But fencing has to be sufficient to prevent intrusion or escape, and it has to be inspected annually as part of your annual report on the program. So there is a requirement when your vet's out to do your inventory report, or that they have to actually do a quick walkthrough of your fences and ensure that they're sufficient to prevent an escape or intrusion. I think there's a requirement after January 1st of this year that all fences have to be a minimum of 8 feet high, and it doesn't mean you have to redo your fencing. That's anything that's new installed on a farm has to be over 8 feet. So we talked about earlier the biosecurity piece, and this is the one that we were asked to elaborate on. When we gave the presentation is that the update to the national standards had a significant piece to them about biosecurity. It's a bit about managing environmental risk, but not strictly the environmental risk from free-ranging, or I guess today free-ranging is a better term than wild, but not necessarily from free-ranging, but anything that can expose risk from other animals that are farmed or not. So we talked earlier about the fences have to be adequate, and it's not defined what that means. It'd be inspected and accredited by your third party to prevent an intrusion or escape. Generally, if it prevents an intrusion or escape, it's pretty adequate for preventing intrusion or escape. Feed storage. It has to be inaccessible once cultivated and stored by wild cervids, including farm-grown post-harvest. And prohibited materials are inaccessible to cervids. So if you have mixed species on farm, if you have any feed for monogastrics, so chickens, pig, hog food, as an example, they might have specified risk materials. And a lot of people don't know this, but you can't feed ruminants to ruminants, but you can feed ruminants to non-ruminants. because there's not that concern about mad cow or prion diseases. And so if you have chicken food, if you have chickens on farm, if you have pig food, if you have horse food, you're going to want to keep those isolated from any of your farm service because they have specified risk materials in them. Water sources. This question came up yesterday. I decided not to jump in at the time. I knew we were going to talk about it today. But standing water used for farm service must be inaccessible to wild cervids, right? So there is a requirement to ensure that wild cervids don't have access to standing water that's shared by your farm cervids. But running water and spring runoff are not currently regulated in this set of national standards. So if it's a moving river or stream that goes through the property and it's accessible somewhere outside of your property by a wild cervid and somewhere inside your property by a farm cervid, then it's not managed, it's considered. And again, I'm not going to argue environment. I've got two sides of that really disliking that policy. I totally get it. Totally understood the comments yesterday about the concern that what is that environmental risk? There are some CFIA folks that would say that's a horrible risk, you cannot absolutely have that. I think what's missing from this is that prion water soluble. If it's water soluble, how dense is it? Does it float? Does it go to the bottom? Does it spread around? And that's all the kind of science that's really hard to define. So when you're trying to go, I guess when you're trying to go for a science-based approach to it, if you can't prove it, or can't necessarily disprove it, then somewhere in the middle lies the VHCP. So at least for the time being, standing water sources are those that are being managed in terms of biosecurity for the farm cervids. Running water sources, including spring runoff, are not currently being managed and don't have to be segregated. Taxidermy and carcasses. We've had this question before from a couple of folks that in essence, the standard says no carcasses or parts from wild cervids or farm cervids of no status are allowed where there may be contact with enrolled farm cervids. However, if you have a processing facility, and that processing facility is maintained separate from where your farm cervids have access, it could be on the same property, it doesn't have to be another property. If all your farm cervids are housed over there, fenced over there, your barns are over there, your processing facility is over here, and neither the twain shall meet, then they are permitted to enter the premises. And I think it's permitted for personal use only where farm cervids do not have access. So again, if you're doing taxidermy, if you're you can bring them on property, provided you always be sure that your farm cervids don't have access to either that area or those parts of the carcasses themselves, right, at some point in their life state, I suppose. After, if you do have farm cervids that you're going to mount, then that's not a problem. Transportation vehicles. Thoroughly clean, power washed, or scrubbed with low pressure water, detergent, or brush, transported off premises. If your cervids are transported off the premises and returned, then they have to be cleaned upon return. If they're transported, if the vehicles are transported lower or no status animals, they have to be cleaned before they come back on the farm. So if you have a farm vehicle, you're going to use it to move somebody else's cervids off the farm, it needs to be, all that cleaning and washing and disinfecting needs to be done off the farm prior to that transportation vehicle coming back on farm, sorry. Then there's a suggestion that there's a periodic washing of farm vehicles. So again, a lot of what we did when this national standards went through the consultation was, how are you going to validate? How do you validate that you wash your farm vehicles? And what that means is your truck. So your pickup truck, not necessarily your trailer or your tractor. So if it's moving off through the property and it's going, through the back 40, going through the bush, cutting firewood, doing whatever with it, where there might be wild cervids, but you're also using that same tractor to then pick up feed and haul it, the feed trailer or whatever, into a fenced area for farm cervids. There's some expectation that there's a periodic washing and cleaning. I've asked the CFIA how we validate that. And what they have asked for is just a protocol that says, yes, every so often we wash the vehicle and clean it, and then take a picture of it. This is one of those things that's already on my list for next year's national standards updates about what that means, because there's no parameters in terms of timelines put around that. Does it have to be once a month? Does it have to be every time they go into the field? So time will tell. We have a form amongst those. It's a document that says, yes, this is our protocol for how frequently we're going to do it. For the time being, we'll manage that information from an administrative standpoint, and we'll fight with the CFIA over what becomes of that later. Collect and dispose of organic material escaping vehicles with lower or non-status service. So if you have a truck and trailer that come onto the farm and have non-enrolled cervids in them, and you drive it into a pasture or field or park or an assembly area that would be used by your farm cervids, and you have organic material dropping out of that trailer onto that premise the trailer leaves, the animals never got out, they never commingled, but they left something behind, some material or some materials behind, there's an expectation that it is cleaned. The material is picked up and it's made inaccessible by volunteers. See somebody standing with a microphone, yeah?
Do I understand this correct, that if I transport something off of my farm to another operation, back up to a perimeter gate without ever my tires crossing that line, I would still need to wash the trailer? Doesn't that?
Yeah, that's my understanding of the situation, and I'll be frank when I say that that element of cleaning trailers has actually been an element of the program for a very long time that I understand hasn't been followed up on in some jurisdictions, but in Ontario and Manitoba, that's been a requirement of our producers for a long time. And we have and all we have is a statement that says, yes, when a vehicle was cleaned and disinfected according to those national standards, and it outlines here whether that happens before it returns to the farm or whether it after it returns on the farm, depending on the scenario of the animals that are hauled.
Sorry if I didn't make myself clear. I'm hauling my trailer, my animals from a closer to a perimeter gate on another operation, never entering that operation. That should be no different than driving down the highway.
Yeah, and in the past when we've managed that information, for every movement permit that we had that the animals moved off the farm, there was a truck wash statement that went with it. Whether it was your vehicle moving those animals or whether it was a third-party trucking company coming in to pick up your animals to move them off, we've always required that permit, but it's always been part of the standards, just never reconciled. So yes, there is an expectation that with that sort of event, with your trailer returning to your farm, that trailer is cleaned. Now, whether it's cleaned before or after it returns to the farm, it's not a matter of whether it needs to be cleaned, it's where that cleaning needs to take place is more specific to the scenario that you're suggesting. So if they carried your animals to a property but didn't go on to a property and it comes back to your farm, it's cleaned after it returns to the farm. If you're hauling animals off that are accessing, carrying other commingled animals, because if you're hauling them to slaughter, if you're hauling something to slaughter and there's multiple loads or there's some commingling post leaving the farm, the animals never come back. It doesn't impact your status, but it impacts your transport vehicle and the risk associated with it. So the answer is yes, it requires a permit, or not a permit, but a statement that says that the vehicle was cleaned is just relevant to when that cleaning exercise takes place on or off the farm. So we talked about the transportation aspect of biosecurity. The other piece that was a bit of a dilemma, perhaps less so in Saskatchewan, because I understand you have some provincial policy with respect to it, but it's the treatment of escaped farm cervids and the treatment of invading wild cervids coming into a farm premises, and there's a bit of a decision tree. So my understanding is in the province, if you have an escaped wild cervid, there's some limitations on bringing it back into the property.
An escape farm?
Yeah.
Well, we recommend that well, there's a couple of scenarios, but we strongly recommend that you yeah. Exactly. The recommendation is that you shoot it and you don't bring it back in. And there are regulations that stipulate you're supposed to tell us as well when it does escape.
Okay. So this one was perhaps the piece that most delayed finalizing an SOP for the delivery of this program, not just in Saskatchewan, but in every jurisdiction. It's how you handle those escaped animals and how you handle intruded animals. So this is what we call our decision tree. This is the cause of most of my angst. But it's a bit of a flow chart, because what folks wanted to be, like the CFIA wanted it to be transparent to what decisions would be made with respect to escaped animals. And it's important, I think, for folks to know when that escape happens, what your actions are relative to that escape and your participation on the program. So if you have an escaped cervid that's never returned to the herd, it's actually a little bit less of a problem. If it's never recovered, it's treated as an on-farm death or slaughter that wasn't sampled. If it's dispatched, as you suggested, is one of the preferred means of managing that. If it's dispatched and tested, it's considered an on-farm death and tested. And neither of those two have an implication on status, except for it's considered a missample if it wasn't shot, and you have to compensate for it that way. If it's I come from a farm as well. I come from a farming family my whole life, and also an avid hunting farming. So I know that doesn't help you all, but I'm not the enemy. So I know that there are instances, for example, when you open a gate to take a tractor in to feed something, and something escapes out the gate. But a lot of the time, they don't take off. They run the fence line trying to figure out how to get back into it. And my argument to the CFIA was that should not have that much of an impact on your status on a farm. So we came up with these terms of supervised or individual group escapes. So you open the gate, something got out. One animal got out, but it stayed by the fence. And we try to evaluate a level of risk associated with that activity versus something got out and it took off in the bush and it was gone for a week, but then it showed back up. And what do you do with that, and what impact does that have? So the decision tree goes to that if you have a supervised individual or group escape, so you have that situation where the gate was open or a tree fell through the fence or something happened and one got out, but it's right there. And it didn't go anywhere. It ran the fence line. It didn't visit a high-risk area. It didn't go to a stagnant watering hole outside the fence. It didn't go to a salt lick that got set up somewhere else there. You supervised it. You saw it. Didn't take off. You opened the gate back in and pushed it back over the fence or whatever your option was. Then there's no impact on your status. We have to be realistic about how we treat the level of risk associated with that. But then we had a little bit of pushback, which is, what if they exhibited risky behavior? And so we had to, for the CSIA's sake, had to describe that as grazed on open fields or drank from that standing water, or came in contact with a wild cervid that happened to be there, but you saw it happen. Then you have a status level impact of 1 or 2 levels depending on the scenario. And then you have an unsupervised individual escape that happened for more or less than a number of hours and the impact of the status. So if it escapes for less than 24 hours, but it's outside of the rut season, there's a 1 or 2 level downgrade in your program status. If it happened during the rut season, it's a 3 level downgrade on your status. If it escaped for more than 24 hours, the decision outside of rut, then the decision is it's downgraded 3 levels. And if it escaped for greater than 24 hours, during rut, then the status is downgraded to your start level because it has the most risk of that risky behavior, which is it's out in rut for more than 24 hours out of sight and was exposed to risk. So, not that I'm suggesting we shoot it, but by virtue of this very complicated decision tree, I would say there's some advantages to managing those escapes differently. And so if you choose to dispatch the animal, it has a much different impact. Anyway, unsupervised group escape. If you have an entire group of animals that have escaped, you don't know how long they were out, you don't know where they were when they were gone, then we've committed to having an ad hoc committee to put together a couple of folks in a room, some industry representatives, some government representatives, and cash out what the impact might be on that individual farm. Okay. So we try to provide some options to that end, again, just so that it's not a matter of you have an escaped animal, you're off the program. Then we had intrusion, so intrusion by wild cervids. The animal's immediately dispatched and tested for CWD. The outcome of that test depends on your herd staying on the program. If you have a wild cervid, it comes into the herd and you decide to keep it in the herd, and again, in some jurisdictions, this isn't even permissible under provincial legislation anyway, but we have to revoke your status. Because if you don't know the status of that animal in a wild environment and the impact on your herd, and you made a decision. And let's face it, there's risky decisions that are made in terms of how much risk you expose your farm to, and then what we can do with that, right? And I'm not, when I say risky behavior, we're going to downgrade you or kick you off the program, I'm not making a judgment on your value as a human being or a decision you made in your life. I'm just making an assessment of the level of risk that you've exposed your herd to, and what we, in turn, can validate as your level of risk, right? So don't take it personally, which is hard to do, but if it gets in the farm and it escapes back to the wild population, then there's a suspension, and then we have to figure out exactly how long it was there and what animals it was exposed to and make some decisions. And these handy-dandy trees are in the SOP, and I would encourage anybody who's on the program, wants to be on the program, to ask for a copy of the SOP, because it's in there and it will explain all these decisions to you. It has those levels. There's no guessing game. If the event happens, then you can look through it and decide what your options are. What are you willing to live with in terms of decision on the program, and what you're not. And we'll assess it that way. So this is taking a really long time. let's make a little levity. When I talk too long at home, my kids make this hand motion. And they're just little and sarcastic. So if you're getting tired of me, just give me this and I will wrap it up and we'll be done. Multiple premises. So you must have the same, if you have contiguous properties that are touching each other, you have two fences that are right next to each other, they're contiguous properties, they have to have the same certification status. You can have multiple premises that are not contiguous, that are under the same level. So if you have a breeding facility and hunt farm, you can have them as the same statuses. You can have them in different statuses if you want. You can have one on the program, breeding farm on the program, hunt farm not on the program. Sale of one animal from the enrolled program to the non-enrolled program, problem solved, no problem. But if you have two and you want them both on the program, you want them both the same level, because there might be some movement back and forth between those farms of those animals, you can. You have to be able to demonstrate that they're maintained with the same level of program compliance. And you can have different statuses provided that there's different and individual biosecurity. So if you're, we do this too in the Scrapie program, and we'll have farms that are non-contiguous with two different levels, and they'll wait till they get certified, and then everything's certified, and then the movement back and forth between farms is permitted. In the meantime, they simply have an accredited vet, because in the Scrapie program we don't have accredited third parties, we only have one person. Accredited vet can manage this information. If they're comfortable that those two premises have enough biosecurity to ensure no cross-contamination from one farm to the next, so that farm's got its tractor, that farm's got its tractor, I'll put that set of boots on on that farm, and this set of boots on this farm, everybody's happy. Ish. Okay, that is multiple premises. Let's talk about the enrollment process. So, this is a voluntary program. You get on it, you cannot get on it. I'm not here to suggest that you need to be. I'm also not saying it's not important to suggest that you need to be. I'm the third party administrator. As a business decision, you folks decide whether you want to be on the program or not. That consideration process, you need to look at the national standards first. Read those rules first before you go through the challenge of getting enrolled on the program. Because it's not only is it a matter of registering to be on the program, it's your ability to comply with the regulations whether or not you stay on the program. And if you can't meet them, again, I'm not judging your management if you can't meet the program requirements, but I can't keep you on the program if you don't. So know what they are, understand what the program rules are, read the SOP as well, right? I always say the SOP is the easier read. If you have trouble sleeping, the national standards are an awesome document that will help you. But please make that decision. Please make that decision of whether or not you're going to enroll in the program after having read the program information and understanding the challenges, because it is not the easiest program to be on. Neither is the Scrapie program. I hear it a lot, take the blame a lot, just throwing it out there, it's not easy. So understand those first. If you wish to proceed, if you're okay with it, again, not judging what that implication that it has on management, it's not simply a business decision. Conduct initial inventory within 3 months of enrolling and applying, and remit the enrollment package. I've already heard complaints. Yes, there's a lot of forms. But if the forms are filled out and completed, I have all the information I need. You don't have to go looking through this lengthy national standards or SOP to say, did I send in that thing? I don't know if I've got that thing. Do they have everything they need? It's laid out in forms. The forms are completed, filled in, signed and dated. We're good. So there's a number of them. Here's the list. This presentation you're welcome to share. I don't mind printing it and sending it out to folks if you want it afterwards. But if you're enrolling, that's forms 1, 2, 3, 3 if applicable, which is the transfer to herd management, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 11, 12, 14. And those are what you need. See what's easy. And then with that admission package, we simply go through that information, make sure it's complete. The first year is relatively painless in comparison, at least for us, because we simply have to make sure that we have the information that's on the form to put you on the program. It's the reconciliation years where we have to look at all this extra documentation, gets a little more challenging. We assess entry level and an anniversary date. So with your package, we'll look at it, we'll assess whether or not it's eligible. There is an opportunity, I'll go up this slide like this, so I'll do that again in a second. It'll give you an anniversary date. What that anniversary date means is that next year at that time, we're going to need a file from you, in and around that time. You have a bigger window of grace with the VHCP, understanding that there are some management things that happen at different times of the year that make it complicated to do inventories and the like at certain times of the year. With your anniversary date, you have to do your inventory 3 months before or 3 months after. It gives you 6 months to get your inventory completed and all of your paperwork together. So that's, again, the list of forms. and then you'll send them in. So the anniversary date, if you get enrolled, will be issued on a certificate for you. It'll be outlined what your status level is, what your anniversary date is, and then every year before your quarter comes, we send out a reminder. Hey, remember your anniversary date is coming up on this date, so you have that 6-month window in which to do an inventory report, complete your forms, get your movement permits and your test results if we don't already have them together in time to get this in by a certain date. So we kind of help walk you through that. And we have a 30-day service standard for enrollment. And that's long. Enrollments don't take that long, but we do have information on our end that we have to validate. So if you send us a package, just because we received the package does not necessarily mean you're automatically enrolled in the program. We have to validate some information in the background. So I know that there are some folks who want to be on the program for that compensation piece. And if that's the case, I just ask that you give us about a week. So if the date is April 1st that you have to be on the program, even though we have a 30-day service standard, we can do it within a week's time. Please try to get it into us by then, because we also get dinged in those audits by the CFIA if we receive a package on this date and we give you some anniversary date that's before that, right? So they check it. I get it from both ends, coming and going. So just make sure that you have it in plan. Yeah.
Do we have to mail a week before that, or?
Yes, please. When we get to that last week of March, if we've got a pile on the desk, we'll work a little overtime to make sure that everybody has them. But if we get them in the mail a week after, it's hard for us to change because we double check them. Yeah.
Question maybe is in everybody's minds, what is the cost for Scrapie Canada to administer the VHCP?
So this is going to be an unpopular comment in the room, undoubtedly. For producers who are currently enrolled on the program, there is not a program fee through the first 2 years of our delivering the program. That was an arrangement we made with the government of Saskatchewan. I don't know if you want me to throw that out there or not, but they're supporting the cost of that through the transition because it's not without its hiccups and it's time-consuming. So, but if you are an enrolling producer, if you haven't previously been on the program, there is a fee associated with it because we didn't figure that into the transition of taking over the files. It was based on how many files we had, how many animals were in them, and how long it was going to take us. We're a national not-for-profit, so we are required to do these things on a cost recovery basis. So that fee didn't take into account, and we didn't know the CFIA was going to make it a requirement. We didn't expect a bit of a flux of people on the program. It's the same here in Saskatchewan as it is for every other province, which is $125 a year.
If I can just mention too, you know, that's a pretty good deal. And you know, it's not much, I think anyway. But part of that is based on, I know you guys have to do a lot of paperwork, but they can offer that fee because they have all your paperwork filled out and they can go through it much more quickly than I know when we would do the program. Maybe we babysat, you know, we would do a lot of the work for you, right? So, but if you're going to get that cheap fee, then it comes with having all these forms so that they just go check, 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 that's correct? Yep. You know, so I know it's a hassle, especially in the beginning, but it does allow you know, them to offer it at a much reduced, or, you know, at a very, I think, reasonable cost. Just for what it's worth.
Thank you. Yeah, so that, and it's the same program. We've done a restructuring of our fees, even for our own members in the sheep sector for the programs we deliver, and that's the same fee that they're getting. So we've made it everyone across the board, yes.
And it says conduct an initial inventory within 3 months of applying. I don't want to have my animals right now for the so I have 3 months.
So we have to have the inventory to get you enrolled. By doing it within 3 months of enrolling, it indicates it's within 3 months in advance of doing it. In your advancement years, it's in 3 months of either side of that anniversary date, but we have to have the inventory available to get folks on the program, because that becomes the starting point for the program enrollment. Okay, so throughout the program year, remit samples for CWD testing in a timely fashion. We talked about that earlier. You remit the samples to the lab to be tested. I don't need test results until your year-end reconciliation. So it's only a requirement that you do it in a timely fashion, and that hasn't been defined by the CFIA, whether timely is 2 days, 2 weeks, or 2 months. So I'm just throwing it out there in a manner in which it's delivered to national standards. Collect, and I always suggest to people, as well as on this program and the Scrapie program, just have a file. And as you're doing stuff through the course of the year that's relevant to these sorts of pieces of information, throw a copy in the file so that year end, when you're trying to put everything together, it's in one resourceful piece. I know that sounds simplified for people who have thousands of heads to deal with. Nonetheless, make an extra copy and throw it in. So collect movement permits and CWD test results throughout the course of the year, because we'll need them once a year. Remit that Form 9, the on-farm death report, quarterly where applicable. So if you don't have any, I don't need them. I don't need the blank form, but if you have some, just report them. And again, it doesn't have to be with the test results. It simply needs to be a listing of animals that died over slaughter or hunted on an animal farm. The Form 10, which is the escape intrusion report, it's simply the document that asks you to fill out what exactly happened. It helps us because, as we indicated in the biosecurity piece, we have to make an assessment on risk based on how long the animal was in or out, depending on if it's an intrusion or escape. So simply fill that out and give it to us as those things occur. It's interesting because we spent a lot of time having to develop that piece to satisfy the CFIA when the decisions were made, and the reality is that these aren't really frequently occurring events for enrolled farms, but nonetheless send them in. And then complete and collect Form 13 for each transport event, but we require those on an annual basis with your annual inventory report. So just suggest that you get them in order as you're doing them and make them ready, and then send them in with your annual report. Advancement process. So you complete your inventory within 3 months of your anniversary date, which we talked about. Complete and remit the appropriate list of forms, and here they are. And again, they're done to just make it, I know it seems like a lot, but from an administrative perspective, if they're filled out, the information is on them, we got everything we need. You're not guessing about what you may have or might be missing, and we're not guessing either. It's easy for us to find, and it makes delivering and assessing information easy enough. And then we assess your status level accordingly. And then again, there's a 30-day service standard on for those files and advancement as well. And from our perspective, they take a lot more work in those advancement years, as we actually go over animal by animal to look for your changes in your inventory from the previous year. And then we reconcile where they went, we look for any of the gaps. Program status is the program levels work at an entry level E, and then with each year of program compliance, they go from ED, CBA to certified. Enrollment, everybody comes in at entry level E, except there are some exceptions. We can provide an accelerated entry to level C, provided you can demonstrate having followed the program requirements for 3 years. Right? So if you have an existing farm and you've been in business for a while, you want to get on the program, but you would like some recognition for what's been done in the past, we can consider, and I'm not guaranteeing, but we can consider an accelerated entry, provided you can demonstrate you follow the program requirements. This one I know is an issue, and I've had a phone call with respect to this, and if you were one of these people, come and see me afterwards. We've come up with a bit of a way of managing it. But I know in the past, the CFIA has turned down people having purchased animals of the program status and starting a farm from new. And they wish to transfer that program status, and in the past they've been denied that advanced status. So we have actually managed to work out a system where we can allow acquired status, right? So if you want to buy a certified animal from a certified farm and start from a place that's never had cervids on it, and you want those animals to have a certified status, provided you meet the criteria for that, we can do it. And I know that's not been the case in the past, and I know the CFIA has rendered a judgment on it, and if you're one of those people, come and see me. Have an idea. Because that is something that hasn't been allowed, but it's something, and again, this is not my guess. This is not a maybe it will or won't work. This was an approved evaluation of that status based on certain criteria agreed on by the CFIA. Yeah.
So right now Alberta isn't looking at taking Scrapie Canada on as our administrator, and that's still up in the air actually. But we're at certified. So you're saying we wouldn't be grandfathered in at certified if we roll by the end of...
Yeah, so that's a good question, but maybe a bit of a misunderstanding of where we are in the process. by us administering the program, it doesn't change anything for an enrolled producer, irrespective of what jurisdiction you're in. So if you are enrolled in the program in Saskatchewan, and you have been for 10 years, and we're delivering the program, you're the same status, you're the same anniversary quarter, you are the same everything. That doesn't change. What I'm talking about is new farms starting anew, right? And there is some confusion on that. People will say, I've been on the program now that you're doing it, and am I enrolled? If you were already enrolled in the program, you were still enrolled in the program. Your anniversary date is the same. All of that remains the same. It's not a new program, it's just an updated program, set of regulations. So, because we're doing the same with Quebec, we're doing the programs for producers in Quebec. It changes nothing about their current status of the program. Now, they are required to meet the new program requirements, but those are two independent pieces. One is us delivering the program, and one is the fact that the program rules have been changed by the government. Okay? So, as somebody who's on the program currently in any of those jurisdictions, this isn't a new program, it's an updated program. Okay? So you're automatically grandfathered to whatever you have in existence in the program. So, yeah, so this is specific to folks who are purchasing. So if you're a certified farm and you have somebody who wants to get into the business and they want the certified status, so they want to buy all your animals, start from fresh and be certified, they can do it. Okay? Now, there are certain limitations, most specifically about where you're putting those animals after you buy them, right? So there's that assessment of the risk. You're better off starting from a farm that's not had cervids on it, right? Because if you don't know if they've had farmed cervids, not wild. Wild is irrelevant. If they've never had farm cervids on them before, and we can assure 10 years of that, you get whatever status those animals are. If you don't know if they've been farmed, then there's a maximum level C. And then if they had farm cervids on them, the highest level they could be is whatever level those farm cervids were at. So if they were not on the program, you can't get the status. If you buy certified, but that farm was D, you can get D. Okay? I know that's complicated, but at least we had a minor win with the government on that one. So that one we fought for fairly significantly because there was some wiggle room in it, and there was some precedent in it. It's been allowed on other programs similar for controlling prion diseases, and it's been permitted, and that's been upheld, and it's even been allowed in some sectors in the cervid industry. And I don't know why it's not been equivalent, but now it is. I feel a little bit better. I feel like I've got it in there. So then, we talked about the acquired status of purchased herd. And again, if you're already a cervid farmer and you have an established herd, we can look at advanced status, but you do have to be prepared to demonstrate that you followed all the program rules for however many years of status you're looking for. On an annual basis, a few things happen. Advancement, which is you're upgraded annually with your annual report and program compliance. Or you can be downgraded for program non-compliance as per those fancy pieces that we just went through, and the SOP explains that fairly decently. It's fairly transparent in terms of what impact your decisions make relative to your inventories, relative to your dead stock testing, and relative to your biosecurity measures on what your level becomes that next year. And program status can be revoked, so it can be removed for certain instances as well. Okay? So you can be kicked off the program. Both the program suspension, not both. There's more than one. Your status assessment, your in any given year, whether you go up or you go down, or you didn't gain acquired status, any suspension from the program or a revocation of the program can be appealed. Okay, so it's not without a reconsideration. If you think you have a case for why it was unfairly or unjustly done, there's an appeal process and it's set out on the SOP. So we put some folks together, again, people from the industry, yourself, government, and there's a list of who's eligible to be on this committee, and folks sit down and then consider what, they reconsider that decision, and whatever decision they come up with is what you're stuck with. So if that's something that you want to consider, just let me know, and absolutely we have a process for doing it. Program suspension, we've gone through these. Failure, we're good. Okay, so the program suspension, status suspensions happen if you don't submit your annual reporting time, if you don't meet that surveillance criteria, if there's a suspicion of CWD or CWD investigation. So if you become part of an investigation, you are suspended pending the outcome of that. Again, the outcome of the egress decision, program non-compliance, and gross negligence with respect to the national standards. So that's going on the program for whatever purpose, and then just clearly not following the program regulations. At some point, we just say, look, we're not going to keep going through files. We have to get all this information, try to help you out to not follow it. So If we find that becomes a trend, we just don't keep folks on the program. And that's not our goal. Like, our goal is not to not keep folks on the program. Our goal is to help people to be on the program wherever we can and within our limitations, of course. Suspension, no. So let's say you don't file your annual report on time. We'll send you that letter that says this is your anniversary date. We need your package within 3 months before, 3 months after that anniversary date. We don't get it within that time frame. Then we say, hey, you're suspended. Didn't get your file, so you're suspended. But if we then get the file, because we'll tell you, you're suspended. You have this many days to come up with this whatever piece of information is missing. If you do come up with it and manage to get it put back all together, your status is reinstated. Okay? Or if there's something we find in that package that means you're downgraded based on some of the other stuff we talked about, well, that's the case. But those suspensions, as long as you can reconcile the information, they'll become a permanent mark in terms of your program participation. There was, I think, some instances in the past where suspensions went for a really long time. I think they were because farmers were part of the disease investigation. So we put a cap on a maximum of 1 year. We've never suspended anybody for more than a month. Usually we're able to reconcile it, or sometimes folks just don't want to be on the program anymore and they don't send in an annual report, which is fine. Again, not judging, but it's probably easier to say, I don't want to be on the program anymore, we'll take you off rather than to suspend you and have to go through that. So we've never done it, but I understand that it has happened in the past that folks have been left in limbo for a while, so CFI has capped it at a year. Again, these are subject to appeal and reinstated at a new or a revised status, depending on what that file looked like when we got it. And then program revocation, so you can, if a suspension goes unresolved for that period of time, so again, if we say we didn't get your annual report in time, you have another month, and you send it to us in that month, and we don't get it in that month, then a revocation happens. Having said that, we've had folks who've called up and said, this thing happened. And it's extenuating circumstances to why it happened. Somebody was ill, somebody passed, there was something that went on. We're not unreasonable, regardless of what you may have heard anywhere else. We're not unreasonable people. And so in instances like that, we simply give folks an extension. And if that's what you need, because something's come up, then just let us know. Just don't come up saying be positive afterwards, because then we won't be allowed to do this anymore. And then revocations are subject to appeal, so if you feel like it was unfair or a just decision, or we could have made it right, granted whatever, more time or something else, then we'll launch an appeal for you. Okay, perfect. So you can, if for whatever reason are removed from the program, it is possible to re-enroll if that's something that you choose to do later on. Right? So I've answered some questions throughout the course of this. I've heard people's frustrations, and I get it, not without sympathy for it, and certainly willing to take those concerns to the next National Standards Review. In the past, my role in that review has been the administrative role, because I'm not the cervid industry, you guys are the cervid industry, but if you want me to do something for you with respect to sticking up for something, folks can attest that I can give the CFI a run for the money on occasion if I need to, so we're happy to do that. Any other questions?
I was just going to say, I support that. I've been on some teleconferences with Corlena, and she's mighty feisty, I can tell you that. So I'll let people ask questions. I do just, at the end though, I just want to mention about the mandatory surveillance versus the VHCP. I don't know if there's still confusion on that or not, but go ahead and ask questions.
Any questions that haven't come up?
Do you have any packages with you to apply this?
I don't, but I'm happy to get you one either electronically or a hard copy for week. Because we do them, we have an electronic, that's a good point actually.
Could you repeat the question, please?
The question was, do I have application packages of forms with me? And I don't, so I didn't bring large packages with them. But we're very quick to respond to request information for it. If you want to come and find me, I'm not going to get run out of the room, it appears, so I'll stay for a few minutes. But if you want a package, give me your either email address, because we can do it all electronically and send them to you. Some people, like myself, prefer hard copies to look at. We're happy to mail it first thing in the week to you and get it off to you straight away. Okay? And again, I would, if you haven't got a copy of the SOP or the national standards and you'd like one of those too, we're also happy to print those off or email them off to you and get them to you.
Thanks for the presentation, it was awesome. One minor frivolous thing, but it's, I know Alberta, we're thinking about it. Is there any way to change the name of Scrapie Canada?
Well,
and I see you do have that. I brought it up because you have Canadian Sheep Foundation, or Federation.
Yeah, and Scrapie Canada is really just a project name that we'd always used for administering our prion disease programs.
Yeah.
And technically, it's just a program name, and it's not an organization.
So is there any way, because like that's, we've discussed it in Alberta quite a bit, and that just the connotation of Scrapie Canada is implementing, the CWD program, Prion Canada or whatever.
Yeah.
Prion prevention,
And that's easy enough to do because it is really just a program name. And can I be honest, and I've heard all the rumors, so there's no elephant in the room as far as I'm concerned. But the truth of the matter is that we took on this program just to be of a service to people where there wasn't a service, right? We haven't gone out and canvassed to take over people's programs and rule the prion world. That's not it. We've done it because we have experience with the Scrapie program, which is delivered much in the same manner as this program is. That's why it was called Scrapie Canada. That's the only reason, was that was our focus. We're the sheep industry, we delivered it for the goat. I don't know that we expected it to take on this kind of a life to it. And so yeah, but absolutely, we can call it something. And I wanted to say, actually, that helped to remind me that our own website is being revamped, so we're trying to modernize it and make it look different. So we have committed to creating a page for all the CWD stuff, so all the program forms will be on there and accessible. The CWD, the SOP, too many acronyms, the SOP and the national standards will all be available in one place. It's also where, if folks want to be listed as an enrolled farm, that information will sit. So we can do that under a different umbrella name. Absolutely, I don't see that as being a problem. Hadn't thought of it, not out of disrespect, but just never really expected it to quite take on this life.
Yeah, exactly. It went into
it's a great
whole
observation.
new focus, but like our convention in Alberta is coming up here in a couple of weeks, and we had a chapter meeting, and that was one of the things. What does Scrapie Canada have to do with us? Re-enrolling our program. So that's just a connotation, and if we can get past that, if there is a possible way to change that in the upcoming year or whatever, prion prevention or something.
Yeah, that's a great suggestion. I appreciate it.
Have a name contest.
Yes, we can have a name and a picture contest. So was there another question?
Yeah. Well, it's more, I just want to comment, because we have already gone through the process, and we've had the vet out to our property and gone through the paperwork and submitted it, and it's in the process of being put in your system. And it's intimidating when you get the email from you guys and there's 19 attachments. But you're not submitting 19 forms. That's just every form there is. That's, the quarterly reports and other things. We called up the accredited vet. He came out for the cost of a call-out fee. He was at our place for a couple hours, and it was reasonably simple. And he'll tell you ahead of time, like, if you want to save money on your vet bill, have your maps drawn out ahead of time, wash out your trailer, because he's required to take a photo of your trailer to make sure that it's not knee-deep in shit. And it was a reasonably positive experience. It was not that hard. And in our dealings with Scrapie Canada, they're very friendly, and they will say, if you're missing a form that you should have handed in, we're not just going to instantly knock you down. We're going to say, hey, you're missing this form. They're there to help us. They're not looking to destroy us, I guess. It's in everyone's best interest that this goes and works, and they want it to work as much as we do.
Yeah, I appreciate that, because I get that the CFIA is not standing up here, and I am, so that it makes me a bit of a target. But really, our goal is to help folks to be on the program and to deliver, to provide a service. And that's hard to do because we're stuck between a bit of a rock and a hard place. I get the animosity of some folks about the program. I get that there's a dislike for what the CFIA may or may not be doing in terms of disease control, totally outside of my control, but we are here to help folks, and we are not unreasonable. And contrary to what it may sound like, I can go head-to-head with the CFIA I don't always win, but I don't also not lie. So I have thick skin too. Tell me what you really think. As long as you're not afraid for me to do the same, then we're good. Yeah.
Are there any allowances for producers that might be thinking about enrolling and they are maybe shy in fencing off feed or sloughs or something like that, and can't be done before April 1st?
Yeah, I can't do that. I can't do that. I really wish I could, and I can't. I'm required to have that farm site plan and the accredited vet, as somebody indicated, is going to come out to your farm, and that's their job, is to be the one that goes out and makes sure those things are being followed. So I can't extend a deadline. It's not mine to extend. I'm here to help you with whatever I can in the interim of that. But I can't make exceptions. And I can't because, like I said earlier, and this is not an excuse, it's a reality. The CFIA could come in and they could look at that and they're like, nope, and you're off the program. Then you've spent the money to be on it. We've spent the time to have somebody process the file. We've given you a program status and they're just going to rip it out. And I know that vilifies the CFIA. But what the heck, I'm not in the room. But it is kind of the reality of that situation. So unfortunately, I'll take whatever paperwork has been put together, and whatever your vet will validate is the information that I will work from in terms of enrollment. So, best I can do.
Do they recognize like temporary fencing? Because I mean, someone might be wanting to get on before April 1st, but I mean, you can't exactly pound posts in the ground right now. So
no, and that's absolutely true. So do they recognize temporary fencing? A question I hadn't asked, but one totally worth considering. Because when they talk about the fencing requirement, they're talking about the requirement to fence your farm's cervids as being sufficient to prevent escapes and intrusions. That's the definition of sufficient fencing. I haven't seen what defines sufficient fencing for feed areas. I've had that conversation. I've had somebody say, well, my hay is all in the shed. Well, I'm like, oh, there's a gate across the front of the shed as far as I'm concerned. Like, that's perfect. That's considered fence off. Now, not everybody has a shed, but it's a great question that I can find out a response to. Well, a temporary fence, and what defines adequate prevention of access to preserved feeds from wild cervids, because perhaps that is an option.
And I would think something like those 3D electric fences or something like that would be acceptable. I mean, you're going to have to sign off that it's inaccessible, and those have been shown to be pretty effective at keeping wild cervids there. So I don't see why that would be.
Does this fencing have to be done by April 1st?
Yep.
See, I don't think there's a lot of clarity on that, even with the Alberta people, because we've had our chapters have meetings and treat people in the same rooms. Sometimes it might be some work for us, but I don't know, probably 10 or 15 people right off the bat that think as long as you've signed and enrolled in the program, you have 12 months to get all this preliminary work done with your vet. Like, yeah, you sign, get the approved vet, get on the program, but then you've got 12 months before you actually have to have your fencing done.
That is correct, and that's what that is what we've been told in Alberta. Basically, if we do our inventory and everything as we have done in the past before March 31st, we're still considered on the program, but not really on. Doesn't really take effect until next year, until April 1st, 2019. So that's for Alberta.
Okay, so I want my government folks to plug your ears for a moment. So the question was about the enrolling farm.
Right.
If I'm to enroll somebody on a farm, there has to be a site plan, and there has to be the biosecurity piece has to be signed by the accredited veterinarian. So the accredited veterinarian who's going to go out to your farm to get you enrolled into your inventory is going to have to complete that piece to validate whether or not it's been done. And there is the expectation that everybody does it as of whatever date. So if Alberta has decided that March 31st is when you're implementing the new standards, then it's by March 31st. If you're currently on the program,
correct.
The next time, you're plugging your ears? No,
you're right.
So if you're already on the program, you don't have to submit anything.
Correct.
Until your next annual report is due. I don't need a site plan, I don't need a biosecurity check, I don't need anything. So if your vet comes out in July, July is when your vet's going to check that your fences are up and your feed is fenced off. And that's the gray area that you can become.
So you're in before protocol, right? You're just enrolling in the program before the effective date? So you
No, if you're already on the program.
Right,
Yeah,
before the 31st.
Exactly.
Right?
So in my mind, everybody has implemented those. They've implemented all those biosecurity protocols, but nobody's going to check on it, except your on-farm death reports that are due quarterly or egress reports. Those are the only things that I'll get electronically or in the mail that I will look at. Your veterinarian is not going to be checking your fence lines and your fenced off water sources until whenever your next anniversary date is. There's a few lines to read between in that one. So that's the difference, though. That's the distinction. So that's the distinction between if you're permanently enrolled in the program and what the implications are for when the information is validated. For folks who aren't on the program, that information has to be validated in order to get enrolled in the program. So that would explain why you had different conversations that sounded different, but there's different scenarios at play, right?
No ear plugging required, that's absolutely, if I understand it as well.
So the producer has an anniversary date, I believe, is February 1st, and is already enrolled. He would have till May 8th to have it fenced, correct? Right.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. No, I mean that jokingly, because everybody is supposed to have it implemented February 1st, but nobody's going to check it until your accredited vet comes out. If you have some fencing to do, put your inventory or your third-party inventory report and accredited vet visit for the end of that 3 months after your anniversary date to get that stuff validated.
And if you're building some fences, you're probably not going to be doing it till the ground's not frozen in the spring. Hopefully by then our CAP programming will be out, and I would check into that before you start building as well.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay. So I hope that helps. If you want any information, because I know y'all want to get out of here. If you need any help, you can contact us at cwd@canshape.ca. That's our go-to address. So I'll get that. Our status assessor will get that. If you have policy programs, I answer them. Julia is our status assessor. If you want to put in the file, she would be the one that collected. We share that. And I'm happy to help where I can. Please.
Okay, thank you, Corlena. Next thing up, we got free time. So go around, check the auction items, bid often. At 5:30, the banquet bar opens, and at 6:30 is banquet. So
Not in here?
That's in here. Banquet's here.
Well, I didn't care. What's the silent auction?
Around 8 o'clock.